Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Coming to Independent Lens.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Hard work and determination. Strong qualities in any teenager.
I have to finish school. That is not a choice.
But when you're homeless, they are essential.
I really want to go to college.
Join Alaska Public Media on Friday, April 17th from 12 to 1 p.m. for a screening of The Homestretch, chat, and conversation about homeless teens. More at alaskapublic.org.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 10th of April. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local forecast information, no matter what part of Alaska you're in tonight. You can always head to weather.gov/Alaska. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us online, Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. And after this show, on YouTube and from our broadcast partner, alaskapublic.org, you'll be able to find this complete broadcast. First, let's check on the winter weather conditions up across the Chukchi Seacoast. Blizzard conditions are happening right now, and we expect that to continue as we head into the evening and overnight hours. Look for very poor visibility, if not zero visibility, as we go into the next 12 to 18 hours there. Blowing and drifting snow will be possible along the Chukchi Seacoast, especially north of Kotzebue there. In the meantime, we're looking toward warmer weather and spring conditions across a large part of Alaska. As we look at breakup for this spring, we're still seeing that most of all the main rivers across Alaska are still showing mostly ice. But to give us a little more insight about the forecast for the coming spring and breakup season, I'd like to welcome my friend and coworker, Ted Moran from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Come on in and join us, Ted. Good to see you again. So here's breakup right now, and again, everything's pretty much ice across Alaska, but you're here to tell us a little bit more about what we can expect in the coming weeks for breakup. Go ahead.
Looks like the warmer weather is indicating to us that we've got an early breakup for the majority of the state, except average breakup up in the North Slope and Yukon area, the upper Yukon area will probably break up a couple of days earlier.
Okay. We've seen warmer than normal conditions for most of the wintertime and in many cases lower than normal snowpack. How does that play into your forecast?
The lower snowpack down pretty much in the southwestern part of the state and western part of the state is telling us that flows are going to be somewhat low river flow discharge. Up in the Yukon, we still have normal snow in parts of the upper Yukon. So we could be seeing influence of higher discharge value, which is telling us that we're more into a dynamic breakup where, yeah, pretty much. Okay. Middle Yukon, yeah, we're probably looking at a thermal breakup.
Okay, but a lot of places may not see a whole lot of flooding impacts because of those two factors, the
That's
warmth and the snow.
That's correct. We're not looking at pretty much low impacts in pretty much all of the state, Dave.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that most places probably aren't going to see too many impacts there, but there are a few places that we're going to watch a little bit more for some potential higher than average flooding conditions, I guess, compared to what we're seeing around the rest of the state.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. We've got a couple areas in the state, 3 right now that we want to kind of keep an eye on. These flood quite often. Generally what happens, we get an ice jam down below the villages, and this can happen for several other locations, Dave.
Right.
Okay, so it's even though we're forecasting low, we still want to keep an eye on the ice throughout other villages.
Sure. Some of the specific ones would be Buckland, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And Circle and Kobuk.
Yes.
But an ice jam can happen anywhere, and if that happens closer to your village, then obviously that raises concerns.
And that's correct, Dave.
Okay, and we're always watching for those. And if you see some conditions change on your river, whether it's a good day or bad day, we'd certainly like to know about it. How can people contact you?
They can contact us at the 1-800 number, 1-800-847-1739.
Okay.
Feel free and email us if you'd like. Email address is right here, and you can also visit us on Facebook and Also on Twitter.
Okay, very good. Those River Watch reports are crucial to your forecast process.
Very much so.
And we'll look forward to getting some of that from all over Alaska as we go into the breakup season here very quickly, right?
Yes, and we will be seeing many people out there as we do our River Watch.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ted. We really appreciate it.
No problem, Dave. Thank you very much.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Well, let's move back into the satellite world here. As we look down from outer space, you can see the Bering Sea, and we're still in that predominant northerly flow. That's keeping a lot of the western coast still cold and still frozen up on those rivers as well. But warmer weather is still trying to build northward as we get into the southern Aleutians. A lot of what we're seeing across the southern chain and just south into the North Pacific is a lot of dry air. So that warmer weather really isn't that far away, and sea surface temperatures themselves continue to be pretty mild. So despite that northerly flow, the ice pack really isn't dropping further south at this point. A lot of that ice is breaking up as it heads into that warmer weather, so we're not seeing that ice edge advance at this point. But a lot of what you see with this speckled kind of texture across the southern Bering Sea is convective showers, and all of this is snow. We're looking at snow showers all the way across the chain and into the southern Bering Sea coast, the Pribilofs, and all the way along the west coast too. Now, as you look at the rest of Alaska, you can see a similar pattern here out over the Gulf, and it should be noted that in the coming days, probably still watching for some shower and even thunderstorm activity across coastal areas in southeast. We've had some buildup across south central Alaska this afternoon. That too could maybe give us a lightning strike, but a lot of what we're seeing is just towering clouds that are building up with the heat of the day, so a very springtime feel out across south central Alaska today. And then we have snow clouds moving down from north to south. A lot of this is also breaking up and will become a little bit more widely scattered is what we're seeing over the Gulf of Alaska today. Stronger winds wrapping around the Arctic coast this afternoon, and some of that again producing blizzard conditions up around the Chukchi Sea coast. So we'll continue to see some stronger winds and probably poor visibility there. Remember, travel conditions will be very tricky, if not treacherous, if you're moving around in the Chukchi Sea coast region there under that blizzard warning that continues tonight and tomorrow. The weather map shows a frontal boundary working in through southeastern Alaska at this hour. Drier air wrapping in behind it. That's a 980 millibar low. Spotty areas of snow showers across the west coast and the central and eastern chain. Another wave of low pressure up across the central and eastern Tanana Valley into the upper Yukon Valley. That's 982 millibars and some snow falling there, and snow falling across the Arctic coast as of this afternoon. Going into tonight, periods of rain for southeast, periods of showers and snow showers across Prince William Sound out toward Shelikof Strait and the northern Gulf. And don't be surprised if you run into an errant snow shower across south central, probably more slush turning into rainfall as we get into tonight. After that starts to fall apart across central and eastern Anchorage. Snow showers continue out across the southern Bering Sea, and for the Pribilofs, for the Aleutians as well. Trough of low pressure across the interior, and we'll continue to see unsettled weather across the Arctic coast. As we head into Saturday, not a whole lot changes. We still have warm enough air across the interior, the middle Yukon and the middle Tanana Valley to see rain and snow showers. In the morning, it'll likely be snow. In the afternoon, it may mix in or completely turn over to rain. South Central, more of the same there. We'll see some afternoon buildup of the clouds with low pressure hovering very close to the Cook Inlet region. And then for southeast, that strong west and southwesterly push will keep rainfall focused on your region with snow showers a little bit further up the Chilkoot and White Pass. For the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula is still looking at snow up the road there. And then for the central and eastern chain, looking at some light snow to fall from Adak to Atka and out toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. By Sunday, you'll see low pressure working its way up across the eastern Gulf. This system is going to be interesting. It's moving from south to north and heading for the Dixon Entrance and the Queen Charlottes. With that, we're going to see a stronger push of warmer weather, but first we have to get rid of the cold. And as that happens, rain and snow showers will be a little bit more likely for the central and northern parts of southeast. That's rain and snow showers for Prince William Sound. Southwestern Alaska is looking at snow showers there, but drier air is working down the west coast. You'll probably see some more sunshine for the interior parts of the Seward Peninsula, the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, as well as Kotzebue Sound. And out west, another player is moving in from the North Pacific. That's at 980 millibars. Probably won't affect the Aleutians with a whole lot of wind just yet, but it'll be something to watch as we move into early next week. In the meantime, temperatures today were in the 30s and 40s for southeast today for Craig, Klawock, Ketchikan, Hyder, 43 degrees there, 41 around Juneau and Haines and Skagway, a pleasant day. Lower to mid-40s for Prince William Sound, south central in the mid-40s. Kodiak hit 39. The interior saw temperatures in the mid-40s this afternoon, 30 in Arctic Village, 30 for Fort Yukon, 46 around Eagle, 35 in Northway, the North Slope. Temperatures were generally in the single digits and low teens, 11 in Barrow, 14 in Kaktovik, about 11 in Kivalina, 16 for areas closer to Buckland, 25 in Nome, and temps around Galena made it almost to 40 degrees. As you get down toward Ruby, temperatures were fairly mild there. Also McGrath at 44. Grayling was 37. Sparivon in the lower 40s. Bethel was 25. Southwestern temperatures were in the 20s and 30s. The Alaska Peninsula generally mid-30s today. Most areas made it above freezing. 33 in St. Paul. Cooler in St. George. On Alaska and Dutch Harbor, 36. And Shemya was 33. Overnight lows will stay in the teens and 20s for most of the interior, the Yukon and Kuskokwim Valley. Bristol Bay in the mid-20s, Kodiak 31, mid to upper 30s for southeast. The Arctic coast, single digits. A few places might go sub-zero like AKwx Pass. 9 above in Nome, southwest in the 20s and 30s. Adak and Atka hovering fairly close to freezing, 23 in St. Paul, up to 28 for your Saturday. Many areas north of the Yukon will still be below freezing tomorrow. Teens in most locations, single digits for the Arctic coast. Kotzebue in the mid-teens, Nome 15, but Fairbanks 36. South Central, including Talkeetna and the Susitna Valley, low to mid-40s. Another mild day there in Kodiak. A little bit cooler out in the island, 38. Lower to mid-40s for southeast. The Alaska Peninsula, the Pribilovs, and most of the chain will stay in the 30s. The Pribilovs themselves might be in the 20s, and Nunivak Island only 19. Here's your flying weather now. For southeast, we expect MVFR conditions to continue. Watch for some pockets of IFR, mainly north of Cross Sound. Hit and miss MVFR conditions north of the Alaska Range. Most of South Central should be okay. And we're going to watch for lower visibility along the western coast there. IFR conditions all the way down into the Yukon Delta and Nunivak Island, and probably some hit and miss IFR across Bristol Bay. Most of the North Slope will also be under MVFR. But let's check your pass conditions. AKwx Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions. Same goes for Adigan Pass tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expecting MVFR through most of your Saturday. Rainy Pass should be marginal through most of Saturday. Windy Pass trending toward VFR conditions there. Isabel Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule through the entire Saturday period. Mentasta Pass will call VFR by the afternoon. Tanita Pass, expect visual flight conditions to continue there. Porter's Pass, we also expect to see visual. Just outside, though, don't be surprised to run into some rain and snow showers that might temporarily lower visibility, but most of the pass should be okay. Chilkoot and White Pass, rain and snow showers will still be in the region through most of your Saturday. We'll call that one marginal. Freezing levels show that warmer air has really retreated back toward British Columbia and western Canada. The surface freezing line now dropping south of Kodiak Island by tomorrow morning and hovering over the Aleutians, putting most of the state in the morning below freezing, at least for a short amount of time. Icing potential, well, as we've seen, there's plenty of cloud cover rolling around this upper level low pressure system. And with that, we will have some icing potential continuing for the North Slope above 3,000 feet along the Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim Valley from about 4,000 feet near the Yaukan to below 7,000 feet out across the YK Delta and the Pribilofs, also across the Alaska Peninsula, south central and southeast, generally above 4,000 feet. So watch for some light to isolated moderate there, and maybe, just maybe, some occasional to widespread moderate across the middle Tanana Valley and the North Slope. Well, things really don't seem to be changing a whole lot from what we've seen this week into the rest of the weekend, and the reason for that is the main weather traffic pattern is just south of Alaska, and you can see that in that main jet stream flow there. The wind speeds anywhere from 90 to 100 knots south and east of Anchorage, a little bit stronger just south of the Aleutians at 150 knots. And where's the cold air? It's parked out to the north and to the west, and it's being shunted off to the south and the west, keeping that out of reach for most of Alaska. A little bit is grazing the west slope at this point, or the west coast, but that's just about it. Here's the wind pattern at 9,000 feet. You can see several circulations around Alaska. The overall pattern, though, should be pretty clear. It's matching exactly what we just saw in the jet stream. That northerly flow coming down over the Gulf of Anadyr from 15 to 20 knots, a stronger flow for the central and western chain, 50 to 50 knots, and south and westerly winds coming over the Gulf around 30 to 40 knots. All winds in the interior at 9,000 feet seem pretty light. At 3,000 feet, once again, we have several circulations across mainland Alaska, but the overall flow, especially out over the Gulf and for the west coast, is wrapping around underneath that upper level low pressure system. So we have a counterclockwise flow, northerly winds across the Bering and the west coast, west and northwesterly winds crossing the Aleutians, and a west and southwesterly flow coming into southeastern Alaska with wind speeds from 25 to 40 knots, 25 to 35 knots out across the west. And once again, our winds across the interior are pretty light, with the North Slope winds running around 15 to about 20 knots or so. So what about turbulence? We expect pretty similar conditions to what we saw today, below 4,000 feet for Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and the Aleutians. Again, light to isolated moderate should be expected. Don't be surprised to run into a little bit of chop if you run into some poor visibility thanks to convective buildup across south central or across the outer coast for southeastern Alaska tomorrow, but by and large, widespread turbulence is not expected in those areas. That's a look at your river forecast as well as your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Greg Miller. Greg's been on a couple of times, and we've been concentrating on the Iditarod. It was his 7th Iditarod this year, and some great lessons he shared with, and some great ideas shared with the audience. Greg also did something pretty interesting very recently, completely different than the Iditarod. He flew a Bonanza from Hawaii to Washington. Welcome back. Let's hear about that flight.
Thank you. Well, it was a great flight. It was a friend of mine, Bill Compton's plane, V-35 and turbocharged 520. And he's done this trip many times, usually solo. So I was honored that he asked me to go with him. He is such an incredibly good pilot and safe pilot. I would never think of doing a trip like that. Well, I'd never thought of doing that trip before, period. But I would never think of doing a trip like that with anybody but Bill and that plane, because I have flown with him many times and I know his level of care and expertise in his flying, his math for working out the fuel, and his maintenance. It's a flight that obviously nothing can go wrong, and you got to be at the top of your game maintenance-wise, etc. But one of the things I know you're going to ask me about some of the, well, just a real short synopsis. It was a great flight. We worked our way from Kauai down to Hilo, and then Hilo, we wanted to come back to Alaska, but the winds weren't quite cooperating, so we instead went to Bellingham. Most people think, well, that's shorter. It's actually 100 miles longer to go to Bellingham. But we had to get up to about, we normally were at about 10,000 feet. It was all through the night, 14 hours and 2 minutes. So most of that in January was, of course, night. Daytime takeoff, daytime landing. The rest was night, but with a full moon. Had to go up to 20,000 feet at one point to avoid clouds and icing, things like that. But the fuel management was the issue. Of course, your engine has to keep going. Time to take care of that before you ever take off. Bill runs Lena Peak, and he's written many articles for Beach Owners magazine as to how to squeak the most mileage out of every ounce of gas. And he takes it to a science. And I think the people flying 121, they know that, they're taught it. But those of us in general aviation, it's different. It's sort of backwards thinking from what we were taught.
How many gallons of gas did you have?
We had 217 gallons, and what that leaves us with is about 3 hours of reserve. So we had about 17 hours. We knew we'd only take about 14 hours. The winds forecast these days are just incredible, the wind modules, so that you can estimate within minutes as to when you'll get there. So it really, for Bill, one of his lessons is you don't want to be a tanker and just put on all the fuel you can, because you'll only get about 25, for distances of that nature, you'll only get about 25% of that gallon, that extra gallon you're carrying. The other 3/4 you're carrying it and using it just to carry it.
Yeah.
And so you've got to believe the math. And the thing that I was delighted to learn about was you don't want to go fast and then faster. You want to pull that power back. You got to have your graphs so you know what to pull it back to. Hold at a constant angle of attack, And as you get lighter, you're coming back and back and back. And Bill would constantly be asking me, Greg, what's your indicated? And I'd say whatever the speed was, and he'd say, ooh, too fast. Come back on the power. And most of us would think, great, I'm going fast. Maybe I can go faster. Nope, that's how you burn too much fuel.
Let me ask you a couple quick questions before we run out of time. Have flight following or SATCOM?
We had a SATCOM, we had inReach, we were beeping every 10 minutes, and that is invaluable. My family, friends, they knew altitude, lat long, speed, all the way, and it was great. We were also on HF reporting and position reports every hour. That wasn't overly reliable. The inReach was the way to go.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Greg, because it's something I've talked about a lot on this program. It's for what you pay for that. Every pilot in Alaska should have one.
It was fantastic.
Just less than a minute left. So you got back and you had a surprise, huh, as far as the final airport and approach and whatnot?
We did. The weather was supposed to be better than it was. They said 4,800 feet, and we were IFR, and we start coming down and coming down and coming down the ILS, and that 4,800 feet. Now that was a METAR, that was the actual report. It turned into 300 feet. And at the end of a 14-hour flight, you do not want an approach down to minimums, but there we are. One other thing, if I've got just a moment, we were both surprised at how fatigue plays into this, and you will never know it when you're up in the air. It was only when we were down on the ground, looking back, both 5 minutes later, 5 days later, whoa, that takes it out of you. And how to prevent that at the front end. Maybe start your flight a little later in the day, shorter flights, whatever it might be.
Good idea. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you.
It's always great to have you.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. Until next time, fly safe.
Thanks, guys. See you again on Monday. And speaking of changes in the weather, I'm understanding that there's thunder in Anchorage right now. Thunder snow, to be exact. So those minimums are probably coming down in a few other places. Here's a look at the sea ice edge as it stands right now. What we were talking about before still stands. We still have that northerly flow coming out of the Bering Strait, but we still have warmer than normal sea surface temperatures here in the Bering. That warmth is keeping the ice from making any movement southward. In fact, a lot of the strips that are breaking off are melting as they move south. So right now, things are doing okay for St. Paul and St. George, the ice pack well away from your area. Looking at the forecast in southeastern Alaska, south and westerly flow still holding around 30 to 35 knots south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance. Southerlies inside of the inner channels there around 20 to 25 knots. 4 to 5 foot seas are expected. 14 to 18 foot seas though as you head north from Cross Sound up toward Yakutat. Look for those winds around 20 to 30 knots. For Sunday, a south and southeasterly flow inside the inner passages, 20 knots in most areas, 4 foot seas also in most areas. The southwesterly flow diminishes to 20 knots with 15 to 16 foot seas and 14 to 15 foot seas there north of Sitka to Icy Bay. They're looking at 25 knot winds from the south and southeast hugging the coast. For South Central, a variable flow in the northern part of the Cook Inlet, more of a westerly flow though as you head down south of Callaghan Island, across the Barrens through Shelikof Strait, 20 to as high as 35 knots. When you get into the western Gulf, that's 20 to 40 knots, strongest east of Kodiak Island. East and northeasterly winds across the northern Gulf, 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 9 foot seas expected there. For Sunday, look for the flow to pick up a little bit more from the south and west for the western Gulf and outside of Resurrection Bay, 20 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas. A southeasterly flow picks up in Prince William Sound with 3 foot seas there. Southwesterlies south of Montague Island at 25 knots with a 9 foot sea. And southerlies coming back up the Cook, 4 to 5 foot seas expected with a 15 knot wind. For the Alaska Peninsula then, look for a broad westerly flow, 25 knots inside of Bristol Bay, 7 foot seas expected there, 30 knots on the western and northern Pacific. Look for 11 to 12 foot seas there south and west of Kodiak Island. It'll be a little bit higher. As you get into Sunday, a northwesterly flow with that shift taking place. We'll see 4 to 9 foot seas as you head down south of Port Hayden along the Bering Sea coast. 15 to 25 knot winds there from the north and west and 20 to 25 knot winds in the North Pacific with 8 to 9 foot seas. For the Aleutians, a northwesterly flow from Kiska to Attu. Otherwise, westerlies across the central and eastern chain. Look for 25-knot winds south and west of Nikolsky with a 14-foot sea, 30 knots there north of Nikolsky and Unalaska with a 14-foot sea, and you'll see similar conditions as you head out to the west. Look for a change out in the west, though, for Sunday. A north flow coming in at 15 knots with a 7-foot sea. Westerlies continue into Adak from Kiska at 20 knots with an 8-foot sea. Northwesterlies also blow into Atka and Nikolsky and Unalaska with wind speeds around 20 to 25 knots. 10 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side and 9 to 10-foot seas for the central and eastern chain on the Bering Sea coast. For the west coast on Saturday, a north flow coming across St. Lawrence Island at 25 knots. We still have ice conditions north of Nunivak Island to Hooper Bay. Northerlies coming across St. Matthew with a 7-foot sea and 9-foot seas there from St. Paul. It looks like 20 knots there from the north and west. As we get into Sunday, look for northwesterlies coming across the coast, 15 to 20 knots. Looks like St. Paul and St. George still looking at northwesterlies with a 7-foot sea and 7-foot seas as well for the St. Matthew Island waters at 15 knots from the north and west. For the Arctic coast, a north and east flow for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, all around 15 knots. Northerlies coming down from Cape Lisburne into Kotzebue Sound, around 25 knots there. For Sunday, look for a little change in the north, generally east and northeast conditions there for the central and eastern Beaufort at 15 knots. And the Chukchi Sea coast comes down to 15 knots in all areas. A north and east flow generally hugging the coast from Wainwright all the way into Kotzebue Sound for Sunday. Recapping tonight's weather, a blizzard warning is in effect for parts of the Chukchi Sea coast, and that will continue as we head into tomorrow. Look for zero visibility at times, and blowing and gusting winds will probably drift the snow, making travel sometimes impossible. So be extra careful if you do have to go out. Use your wits and be smart about it there. Blizzard conditions are expected. For Alaska, the Alaska Range itself into southwestern Alaska, we expect to see some snow and snow showers to continue. Convective weather across south central is occurring right now. And for southeastern Alaska in the coming days, expect thunderstorms across coastal areas there, especially over the marine zones as we head through Saturday and Sunday. For south central, including the Susitna Valley and into the interior, rain and snow showers may develop during the day. A better chance for snow showers in the morning and to mix during the afternoon. Snow showers for the Arctic coast and the Bering Sea coast will continue under a cold flow with new weather developing in the west. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.